Okay, let's get started then. Good evening and welcome to Ohio EPA's public hearing regarding a draft renewal of the wastewater discharge permit for the NRG Power Midwest power plant. My name is Darla Peel. I'm a public information officer with Ohio EPA. I work with as a liaison between the staff of the Northeast District Office and residents such as you. So I'm the key contact for that office for anything that folks have questions about. My job is to find information for you, to answer questions for you, and that sort of thing. So my contact information is in the presentation. With me this evening are Cole Miller, who works with the Division of Surface Water in the central office in Columbus, and Zorica Dajanovic, who is also with the Division of Surface Water in the Northeast District Office in Twinsburg. Dina Pierce is here. Dina is the media coordinator. She's at the back. And in just a moment, Cole is going to give a presentation about the draft permit renewal. If you haven't already done so, and I know most of you have, please sign in at the registration table before leaving. Your contact information will be added to an interested parties list. It's used solely to provide you with information about this specific action. We don't use it for anything else. We don't share it with anyone. The format for this evening's meeting is that we'll have the presentation. We are going to do a 30-minute Q&A session because we know that most of you have comments, or many of you do, and you'll want to put those on the record, and that's why we're here. That's the sole purpose, the primary purpose of being here this evening, is to listen to what your comments are. So we'll do that for 30 minutes. After that, we go into the more formal part of the meeting, and that's the public hearing. And I will read a speech into the record, which is required. We have a court reporter here from Finson Mancini, and he will take down testimony as you provide it. And at that, if you'd like to provide testimony, we have those blue cards that you saw on the table. If you don't have one now, you'll have an opportunity to get one closer to that time. We'll have a couple of people with those in their hands who will offer them to you. So you won't be sunk or have to go back to the table to get those.
Quick question,
yes.
if I may. If we wanted to get minutes of this meeting, how would we go about doing that?
I can talk with you about that after, if you don't mind. Thank you. But they will be made available. Okay, so the one thing that I ask is that before we go any further is for you to silence your phones. If you have to take a call, please just step out of the space. Most people are very considerate, but I always have to remind, just in case. So I'll turn things over to Cole now. Ask him to ask questions until you're finished.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all for being here. I'd like to first kind of go through what the permit is and how we are here today. If you don't mind, if you can hold the questions till the end, I would really appreciate it. We're here to talk about the renewal of the NRG Avon Lake Power Plant. All right, here we go. All right, so first I want to make some broad statements about what the permit does so that we're all on the same page to begin with. So as far as mercury, this draft permit proposes to reduce the levels of mercury allowed to be discharged by more than half. Bromine is a chemical that's authorized for discharge, but there are limits associated with it. Furthermore, bromine and chlorine are not currently used at the facility. For total suspended solids and oil and grease, the concentration limits are still in there. As far as withdrawing water and the cooling water intake structure, the permit requires the permittee to provide a study to determine the impacts of the cooling water intake structure and to furthermore propose compliance methods to be in compliance with the federal regulations regarding cooling water intake structures. And then finally, as far as heat pollution, which is another concern, the permittee performed a thermal mixing study which indicated that the thermal plume or the mixing zone does not interfere with the passage or fish or aquatic life. All right, so that's a brief overview of what the permit does. Now we'll get more into depth here. So what we're going to try to do, we're going to go over what a power plant is and the waste streams associated with it. We're going to go more in depth with what the permit requires. And then as Darla mentioned, we're going to have a 30-minute questions and answers session followed by a public hearing where the court reporter will take your comments into the official record. All right, so this is just a quick picture of the power plant. I know it's kind of difficult to see. Here's a coal pile. Here's the intake structure or intake loop. We'll come back to it here in a little bit after we kind of become acquainted with the power plant. All right, so to generate electricity, there are three main components. There's a boiler, there's a turbine and generator, that's where the electricity is generated, and then finally a condenser. So we're going to build a power plant here in these next few slides. And I think this is important just to know where the waste streams come from. So that's why we're talking about this. So fuel and air are mixed and combusted within a boiler. So this generates a lot of heat. Now someone had a question, and I apologize that this was not made clear. So it says bottom ash down here. The facility does not just dump the bottom ash directly into Lake Erie. Bottom ash is clarified, so it's settled and then handled and sent to landfill. So it's not like it's going directly to Lake Erie. So I did want to make that clear on this. All right, so the main part of this picture is to show that fuel and air mix together, combust, which generates heat. This heat, there are a bunch of tubes with water in it, and this heat turns the water into steam, high pressure steam. And with this high pressure steam, it spins a turbine, which is connected to a generator, and that's how electricity is generated. So after the high pressure steam is used, there's a bunch of low pressure steam. So the facility needs to do something with that low pressure steam. And the industry standard is they condense it. So that does two things. You condense it, which turns steam into water, so that creates a vacuum, and so that keeps the low pressure steam moving. And then secondly, they don't have to put new water within the boiler. They can use this hot condensate to go back into the turbine, or back into the boiler. So this picture shows where the hot steam goes in the condenser, and then we kind of have a loop here for the turbine. As far as how they cool the steam within the condenser, that comes from Lake Erie. Water goes through the cooling water intake structure, goes through the condenser, and then obviously there's heat generated and is discharged into Lake Erie. So those are the three main components. Coal is combusted to generate heat. Heat transforms water into steam. Steam turns a turbine. The steam gets condensed, and water is used to perform that condensation. And just so everyone is clear, the condenser is the largest amount of water discharged within the whole process. All right, so now let's go back into the waste streams, what we're permitting. So US EPA effluent limitation guidelines, they're technology-based limits where they're part of a Clean Water Act requirement. US EPA went out and they surveyed industries and they determined what is achievable. The steam electric power generating, which coal power plant is, it was first established in 1974. The Clean Water Act was issued in 1972. So it was one of the first effluent limitation guidelines established. In 2015, it was last updated, and this permit does address some of those updates. Some of the guidelines or waste streams that they look into is stormwater into coal pile, bottom ash transport water, and then just low volume waste, which is pretty much everything that doesn't have a guideline is considered a low volume waste. I know it's kind of a generic term, but that's the definition in the federal rules. All right, so we're going to go back here real briefly, and if you're trying to follow with the slides, just so you know, some of those were hidden, so we're going to skip along a little bit. So coal pile, we got stormwater runoff. Now we're back to the boiler. Fuel is entered, it combusts. So not 100% of the coal is combusted. There are some uncombustible parts, and that's called ash. And heavier parts of the ash falls to the bottom of the boiler, and it's called bottom ash. And to get rid of it, so it goes down into a slanted hopper, and water is used to transport it. Now, at this facility, they actually have a recycle system. So what they do is the bottom ash water is wet sluiced and taken to a clarifier and treatment system. So the bottom ash is settled and contained and ultimately landfilled. The clear water that doesn't settle in the clarifier is then typically reused. So they do have a water recycle treatment system there, but there is occasionally overflows within that treatment system. Then secondly, we're going to talk briefly about the flue gas. So there are sometimes wastewater streams associated with it. So the fly ash, we just talked about bottom ash. It's the heavier particles that fall to the bottom of the boiler or the reactor. The fly ash obviously floats and flies up to the top. So they have a fly ash collection system, and that they use more or less electrically charged plates which attract the fly ash to it. No wastewater is used there for this purpose, for this particular facility. And then after it's collected, they landfill the fly ash or dispose of it. And then secondly, there's a scrubber. So I am not as familiar with some of the air pollution controls, but some scrubbers are wetter and there's a wastewater stream associated with it. The permittee's scrubber is dry adsorption. So they do not have a wastewater that we are currently permitting. But I just want to bring it up just so that we all know they don't have wastewater with those two. All right, so as far as what the permit requires, as far as monitoring, there are 5 internal monitoring stations. So there is one for the bottom ash transport water effluent. There is one for boiler blowdown. There's one for coal pile runoff. There's one for metal cleaning waste. And then finally, there's non-contact cooling water. And then in addition to those internal monitoring stations, which are monitored prior to the final discharge to Lake Erie, there are 3 direct discharges which are monitored. One is the condenser cooling water, and then the other 2 are low volume waste basins, which also consists of some of those other waste streams. So here's just the picture one more time. We got our boiler blowdown. That's whenever the condensate or the water from the turbine cycle, once they're at too high of concentrations, typically they have blowdown, so it's a little bit higher in dissolved solids. Or we got one monitoring station for the stormwater runoff, overflow from the bottom ash transport water recycle system, the condenser, and then low volume waste and metal cleaning. So this next slide is to kind of show almost all the water is discharged from the condenser. And remember, the condenser is pretty much just once through. So it goes through and goes right back out to the lake. So the main pollutant of concern there is heat, which we discussed a little bit briefly, that does not affect passage, and we're not concerned that it has reasonable potential to cause any kind of exceedances for temperature-based water quality standards. So let's go on to the next slide, which gets rid of the condenser total so that we can kind of see everything involved. So the red are all the internal monitoring stations, the blue are the final stations, or the final effluents. And so these range between about 100,000 gallons per day to about 2.5 million gallons per day. All right, here's a picture of the power plant again. The two, oh, I guess my mouse is not up there, so I apologize. All right, there we go. So some of the low flow volume basins are right over here in this little area. The intake is right here, so the water comes in here. There are 9 screens for the units, and then the discharge channel is right through here. So that's the condenser water and then also non-contact cooling water. Here's the coal pile. This, I believe, is the elevator or the transportation system to get it over to the coal plant. And then here, well, there's some buildings here that have the treatment of the coal, any stormwater from the coal pile. All right, so now we talked about some technology-based limits. So we know that the waste streams we just talked about, US EPA said, all right, this is what's achievable. We're going to get these on every single facility, no matter whether they discharge to a giant lake or to a zero flow stream. So that's the bare minimum. The next thing is water quality. So every single permit we issue is protective of water quality. So one of the first things we have to do is, what are the stream uses? So we have criteria associated with human health, aquatic life, wildlife, and agriculture. So we include limits for these whenever we determine that criteria would be exceeded. And one of those are mainly mercury is the one of concern. So mercury is a bioaccumulating chemical of concern. So that means instead of organisms or animals excreting or getting rid of mercury, mercury keeps on building up. So we all know it's a real concern. And the standards are very low. 1.3 nanograms per liter is the same as saying 1.3 parts per trillion. So it's a very small quantity that we know causes an issue. So 1.3 is for wildlife criteria. That's a protection of the eagle. And then 3.1 nanograms per liter is for fish consumption criteria. So at alpha 002, which has an average flow rate of about 750,000 gallons per day, we determined that there is a reasonable potential that that criteria, that either 1.3 or 3.1, would be exceeded. So just to back up a step, like what changed? Because one might think, oh, did things change at the plant that caused the need for this mercury limit? And it's really a set of facts that happened prior to this. So in 1997 is whenever we got the new standard. So 1.3 is nanograms per liter, happened in 1997. Prior to that, it was 12 nanograms per liter. At the time, though, we didn't have a good analytical detection method. So 1.3 parts per trillion, that's real small to detect. The standard at that time, so 1.3, the detection limit was all the way up at 200 nanograms per liter. So more or less 200 times the standard is what we could detect. So that was an issue. So in 1998, low-level mercury method was developed, which allowed us to determine compliance. And then the final step was that in 2010, mixing zones were eliminated. So before, when I talked about whether you're on a little stream or a big lake, prior to 2010, mercury or any other kind of bioaccumulating chemical of concern would be allowed dilution. That's no longer the case. For mercury, there is no dilution. You have to meet 1.3 in a pipe. So in preparation to this, Ohio EPA did a bunch of research and study, and within our state rules, we have a general mercury variance, which was based on technical and economic considerations. So what does the mercury variance require? So key is to minimize any kind of pollutants. So anyone who wants to have a mercury variance has to have a pollutant minimization plan. Furthermore, they have to meet a rolling average of 12 nanograms per liter. Third, we set a monthly average limit. So whenever I said we're reducing it from 8 to 3.7, that's the monthly average that they have to meet. So it's definitely more stringent than the 12. And then there are other things, but the last thing I'll mention is annual progress reports. And just as an idea of where they are, the annual average of the past year was was 1.26 nanograms per liter. So in other words, their average annual result was less than the standard. So they are getting closer. And just to kind of show this again, in 2011, whenever a variance was first granted, it was at 8 nanograms per liter. Now we're proposing to make it more than, or less than half of that, at 3.7 nanograms per liter. All right, now we're going to talk about the cooling water intake structure. So Section 316B of the Clean Water Act, which is regarding thermal discharges, requires that the cooling water intake structure reflect best technology available for minimizing adverse environmental impact. So what does that mean? So if we can imagine a screen and you have a flow direction, So the higher the velocity, the more likely it is for a fish to kind of get stuck on that screen. So the first kind of thing we talk about is impingement. I believe in our fact sheet, and this number has gone out, was around 12 million was estimated. 12 million fish was estimated as being impinged in 2006. The second part is entrained. So smaller organisms might not get stuck. I show fish here, but it's more appropriate to show like eggs or juveniles. But they get through the screen and then they go through the condenser cooling system. So those are the two main adverse impacts that we might see is with entrainment or impingement and entrainment. So what can be done or what is being done to reduce those two things? One of the key technologies or the gold standard of technologies is flow reduction, either a cooling tower using variable speed pumps which match the amount of cooling water needed to the amount of thermal or the amount of heat you need to remove within the condenser. And I guess I should also point out, so between 2006 and today, the NRG Avon Lake plant is operating at much lower levels. So overall, there probably are fewer fish impinged and entrained compared to those numbers. The second thing is low through screen velocities. So again, if you have a screen and you have a high velocity, the fish can't swim away. But if you have a lower velocity, those fish are more likely to be able to swim away. So those are two of the main types of technologies, but there are other ones as well. As far as the draft permit, it proposes to, for the permittee to provide a study to determine the impacts, and this is in line with the federal rules and the federal requirements, as well as proposing compliance methods to meet best technology available for both impingement and entrainment. All right, one last thing, bottom ash transport water, we mentioned it before. Currently, they largely have a complete recycle. So almost all the water that comes into contact with bottom ash is recycled. However, they do occasionally have overflows, more when the plant itself, the generating station is not operational. Regardless of that, the draft permit requires a zero discharge of bottom ash transport water by December 2023. So that is one additional thing to discuss as well, or to point out as well. All right, so in conclusion, the draft permit is more stringent and is protective of water quality. As far as the next steps, we are accepting comments until May 2nd, 2018, so that's a week from today. Ohio EPA will consider comments and respond, and then the director will make a final decision on the draft permit. All final decisions are appealable to the Environmental Review Appeals Commission. If you're wondering, how do I submit comments? You can testify this evening. You can mail written comments to this address, or you can email us written comments as well. Again, the comment period ends a week from today. All right. With that, we'll take questions. Okay, yeah.
Could you clarify when the technologies of flow reduction and low through screen velocities went into place or into effect, or have they not yet?
In February 2020, they will provide the study and they will provide their methods of complying. So they haven't, to answer your question, the rules are effective now. The rules allow for a schedule to provide a study and to provide compliance methods. Did I answer your question?
No. Have they actually put the technologies into place and the low flow is happening right now?
Okay, I'm sorry. No. In February 2020 is whenever they will make the proposals.
Okay, so there are no data yet to know if this is really going to lower impingement.
Well, I'm sorry. To that point, the power station has does have reduced flow just because they're not online as much as they used to be, if that makes sense. So it's not because they have, it's not because there's a cooling tower or there's a variable speed pump or anything like that. It's just because it's not operating as much. So the numbers are likely lower because it's not needing as much condenser water. So I'm sorry if that wasn't clear.
Gentleman in the front of the white.
Yes.
When we start discussing compliance dates that far into the future, 2020, 2023, things of that sort, I guess my question is, will the plant even be there at that point? Obviously, if they're applying for these permits, they intend on staying there for a while. Now, the trend in the industry is to see these plants going away. Do they intend to be there for another 10, 20, 30 years? And will they ramp up at some point their production of power?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with what their plans are as far as.
I guess what I'm saying is by the time they may have to meet some of these benchmarks, they may not, that plan may or may not be in existence.
Just as far as background, part of the 316B, the cooling water intake structure rules, they talk about how if a power plant is planning on no longer operating within a permit cycle or in the following permit cycle, they might not necessarily have to submit all the information. So the rules kind of take that into consideration that one, some of these power plants might not be around, and two, if they're not going to be around, then the submittal of that information isn't really going to help any. Is it going to?
Someone, no, I'm sorry, this with the short hair, did you have your hand up earlier?
Yes.
It was you, okay.
Where is the bottom ash landfill located?
I can look into that and I can get you an answer, but I do not know. It's not.
Find out what its remaining capacity is?
Well, I can look into it. My understanding, though, is that if you're picturing it as a typical fly ash or bottom ash monofill that you picture like breaching or something like that, I don't think it's like that.
Is it a pond?
No.
Is it lined?
Could we please not speak out of turn? Yes, sir, over there. You.
Do you have any information there regarding to the conversion of this gas, no gas firewood? And because there's so much news now, of course, because of the potential of the gas line being brought up here from Southern Ohio, and that was earmarked for its power. Now it's going to impact this.
Like a big blob.
Terminating these.
So the question was, has the proposal to use natural gas been looked at as far as this permit? Is that a good summary, or?
As a part of converting from coal to gas fire.
Yeah.
Not using coal any longer is the question.
Right.
Yeah, well, it's not really looked at in this permit. If they're not using coal, there's not going to be bottom ash transport water. There's not going to be a coal pile. So as far as permitting, it's easier if it is a natural gas power plant. So it's not really looked at, but it would only be, there would be less requirements just because there's not as many waste streams associated with natural gas.
What I'm just saying is, that would impact these numbers greatly. So you don't know where they stand on that, what their whole 3, 5, 10-year plan is?
As far as numbers, like my understanding is that they would still need the cooling water intake structure. If that's your question. They would still have a condenser. But other than that,
I think it's a little bit crazy not to have a hearing like this and not to have information about the bill where you're putting that. About where is that as a line, what's the, because I've lived in communities where that stuff leaks out and the municipal water, still arsenic and I mean, I grew up in North Carolina, and that's where Duke Energy is in Charlotte, and Charlotte's water's been ruined by those types of disposal facilities. So really, at a thing like this, we should have a right to know any information we want to about where that's being disposed of, the status of it, you know, is it near this stream, is it near that, whatever, you know, just kind of read it. I'm not blaming you.
Well, if I can address that a little bit, like this permit does not authorize discharge from a fly ash or a bottom ash lagoon.
Have a public hearing, and people are going to ask about that part of it, you should be able to say what they do.
Here's what I'd like to say, when you're going to provide testimony, if you'll ask that question.
I darn sure will.
Yes, ma'am. Yes. All right. Actually, right here.
What's the current permit period and what's the period for this date?
The duration of a permit is 5 years. Can you follow up? Like,
So when does it start?
it would start, so if it is issued, so we'll receive testimony. The public comment period ends next Wednesday. At that point, the comments will be considered, and then if it's issued, it would be issued after that. I don't know how long that would take. I don't know if it would take a month or 2 months, but
So the current one stays in.
it's administratively continued, correct?
Standing at that.
Yes. With the release of mercury in the wastewater, is that monitored independently through compliance audits, or is that something they internally monitor and report themselves? And in addition to that, when that water ends up in the lake and gets sucked into the water intake for our tap water, are the water treatment plants able to pull the mercury out, or does that go through the pipes to us?
I will answer the first one right now, so can you repeat the first question? I'm sorry.
Oh my God. The first question was, are the numbers that they give for their...
Oh, okay. It is self-monitoring data, so they do it themselves, yes.
Are there any independent audits that are done to make sure that they're monitoring correctly?
We do routine inspections, and Ohio EPA does have a lab that we can use to audit.
Have they ever verified the numbers before?
I don't know that answer right now.
And the second question, are the water treatment plants able to pull the mercury back out?
I don't know the answer to that.
Please ask that on the record, though, sir. Yes.
The standard is 1.3 and the variance is 3.7. You guys believe that we will exceed that 1.3 level? And you're using a study or an analysis from 1998 to determine that level. What is happening right now to meet that 1.3 standard? Because it doesn't, issuing a variance doesn't seem like it's, that's the whole point, because we think you're going to exceed the 1.3 standard limit. So you put a variance in place. So what is being done right now? Are you guys proposing a new analysis happen or a new study as opposed to using a 20-year-old?
So this is a question, what is Ohio EPA doing regarding mercury?
Well, yeah, and specifically at this time, but yeah, great, yeah, on a greater scale.
Specifically to this plant, obviously we can see that mercury concentrations have been reduced by more than half. So I think that the general mercury variance, while it is leading to reduce mercury discharges, as far as what we're doing, I'm not sure if there are any new studies. I'm not aware of any new studies being done.
This might sound a little ignorant, but what would happen if you didn't extend the permit? What practical action would they take?
I've never been involved in something like that. I would assume they wouldn't be authorized to have a discharge. So I guess they wouldn't be allowed to operate. I mean.
So it's just like a stop, basically.
If you last that on the record, we'll get a more thorough answer for you. Yes, sir. Yes.
Going to mercury again, how about the flume discharge of mercury that might settle into the lake? Is that considered at all?
Are you talking about air emissions?
Yes.
Air emissions are not considered.
You couldn't hear the question.
I'm wondering how much mercury is discharged from the flue and it will go over the lake and then settle into the water, settle into the lake. I wondered if that was considered.
Air emissions are not considered within this permit.
Your chart labeled waste streams and mercury variance have guidelines and specific values. Are those the result of federal legislation? Are they specifically called out, or is this something that came up by the folks at EPA here in Ohio? Is this an internal rulemaking?
Could you provide could you show me which numbers you're talking about in particular?
Your charts aren't labeled, but mercury variance, what changed, and also your chart waste streams guidelines include. Are those coming out of federal legislation, or is that something that's internal to your organization that you came up with?
If we're talking about the waste streams, if we're talking about the slide where... Here, sir, if I may, if you can just show me the slides. I'm sorry, can you show me that? Okay.
Guidelines include.
Okay.
And then these values here.
Which values?
Yeah.
The states?
Yeah. The values.
All these values right here.
Yeah.
All right, so real quick, so the guidelines, we talked about coal pile and bottom ash transport water. Those are US EPA developed guidelines. Those are not Ohio EPA developed guidelines.
Those are not in the federal legislation. This is internal to...
No, this is US EPA rules, promulgated rules.
But it's not in the legislation.
As far as the Clean Water Act, like the Clean Water Act requires US EPA to do a bunch of studies and research to see...
Stop. You answered my question. You answered my question. Thank you very much.
What else? Dylan, the blue jacket.
Could the bottom ash recycled water overflow be rerouted to the sanitary sewer, be treated from the local KLTW?
It's a good idea. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, it's a good question. I haven't thought it.
I'm not an engineer, but when you speak of the technology not being perfected until 2020 or 23, wouldn't it be wiser to wait until it is perfected to apply for a permit rather than take the risky road of working on the technology while you're discharging everything? Okay?
There was someone here, yes.
When was the last time EPA was at the facility to do any on-site monitoring?
I think an inspection was done within the last month. Or no sampling, but inspection was done.
Of course. What were you inspecting?
Piggybacking a little bit on what she said, I kind of think those far off dates are somewhat of a stalling tactic.
Please state that on the record.
I believe you guys acquired this plant from Genon in 2012, and Genon filed for bankruptcy to become a standalone company last year. So I'm wondering if NRG Energy is going to liquidate this plant to Genon, and whether you guys will even be involved in it, because they could be a standalone company. It's reported by September of this year. So do you know if NRG Energy is even going to be running this plant within a year, or is Genon going to take over for that, because they'll no longer be a subsidiary of you guys?
I mean, I don't have a response to that. I mean, if you have a question more about the MPDS permit and how it's...
Well, I just think it's relevant, because just who's running the
I
plant.
understand what you're saying.
It's relevant.
Excuse me. We can't project because that's a business decision that we don't have any part in, really. And,
But then them being here is, if they're not gonna be
you're
the company.
saying, but we have to focus on what's going on now. That's the focus.
I think his question is, what happened?
That was all I was going to say is, there's been a couple of questions about, NRG, what's their future, will they turn this into a gas plant? That's purely a company decision and a business decision, it's not something that Ohio EPA gets involved with at all. If the permit is transferred to a new owner, then they need to come to work through us to get that permit transferred over to a new owner. If they change their process from a coal plant to a gas plant, it is going to change the effluent quality, as you mentioned. They do need to come to Ohio EPA and get their permit updated for that kind of a change before they make it.
I'm letting people who haven't asked questions, please, Dan.
Yes, I have a question. Does the EPA and the permit have guidelines for the stormwater fallouts within a certain radius of the plant to test that water? And if so, how often has it been tested?
No, we do not have a fallout radius that I'm aware of to test any kind of stormwater. That's
This NPDES permit is specific for this facility. It only covers outfalls and discharges from the physical property itself, not from the city or anything like that.
A lot of the plants underground, if I'm right. There's parts of it that are above ground and so far below. I was wondering if there was any way of checking seepage, anything through the years, because certain areas of the plant, I know are older than I am. So I was wondering if the EPA has asked them to do any testing or anything on that.
I think you're asking about the groundwater in the vicinity of the plant.
Any part of the plant below eye level, has there been anything done on it and checked on through the years? Like I said, the plant's older than I am. I was wondering how the EPA's been doing that.
But we wouldn't monitor that part of the plant. That would be an operation and maintenance facility to make sure that their lines are to the different pieces of equipment are functional and maintained well. That's a plant maintenance type operation.
So they don't need permits for any of that or to prove anything to the EPA with that?
No, they do not.
Thank you.
All right, one more question, and then we're going to go to the hearing at the back in the red shirt.
I was wondering, when you say inspection, what does that entail? When the EPA goes to inspect, you said you weren't testing the water, what are you inspecting?
So a lot of it is regarding record keeping, to verify that there is no falsification or anything that does not, I guess, smell right would be one thing. But a lot of it is to make sure that, again, record keeping is there, and to make sure that to see if they do any lab stuff themselves there, to look at any of their bench sheets, to look at their chain of custodies, to make sure that there is a good documentation to make sure that the accurate that they're reporting to us is legitimate. So that's a decent portion. And then also to make sure that the discharges there are not oily, or to make sure that there isn't anything at issue.
All right, I'm sorry, we're going to close the Q&A session. Here's what I'll ask. If you have a question, please ask it on the record during the hearing. Just put your name on a blue card, pass it in to me, and I'll call upon you. You can ask your question. We will not be speaking. Sir, I'm sorry, I have to do this at some point. And you're welcome to come up after and chat with us, so we'll be around for a while.
I just want to know who's who.
Who's who in terms of?
Who works for who? What?
We are all with the Ohio EPA.
Oh, okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, I thought you had. All right, we're going to go into the more formal part of the meeting now, public hearing, so I ask that you bear with me. Thank you. If you'd like a blue card, hold your hand up, and it'll be sent. Somebody will provide one to you. All right, and before I begin the hearing speech, I'd like to introduce actually Rich Blasek, who is the Division of Surface Water Manager in the Northeast District Office. He wasn't on the panel, which is why I didn't introduce him, but Rich is the head of the program for the Northeast District Office in Twinsburg. Thank you. The purpose of this public hearing is to accept comments on the official record regarding a proposed renewal of the wastewater discharge permit for the NRG Power Midwest power plant. The company has applied to renew its permit to discharge wastewater from the coal-fired electric generation station at 33570 Lake Road. If approved, the permit would continue to allow the company to discharge approximately 389 million gallons of wastewater per day to Lake Erie. Most of the discharge is once through condenser cooling water. The draft permit renewal would also require the company to address fish affected by the cooling water intake system. NRG Power is conducting a study and will submit a report to Ohio EPA proposing methods to reduce impacts caused by impingement and entrainment in the water intake system. The cooling water intake is in Lake Erie and pumps about 427 million gallons of water a day from the lake. Ohio EPA published a public notice to announce the hearing and public comment period regarding the draft permit renewal in newspapers in the area. This notice was issued in Ohio EPA's Weekly Review, which is a publication that lists by county all agency activities and actions taking place in the state of Ohio. Local media also have been provided with significant information about this action. Written and oral comments received as a part of the official record are reviewed by Ohio EPA prior to a final decision by the director. To be included in the official record, written comments must be received by Ohio EPA by the close of business on May 2, 2018. Comments received after this date may be considered as time and circumstances permit, but would not be a part of the official record for this hearing. Please include public notice number 17-12-007 on written comments. Written comments can be submitted to us tonight or submitted to Ohio EPA Division of Surface Water Permits Processing Unit, P.O. Box 1049, Columbus, Ohio 43216-1049. Comments can also be emailed to epa.dswcomments@epa.ohio.gov. This information can be found on the agenda and in the presentation for this hearing. Please silence your phone. It's important for you to know that equal consideration is given to all comments received in writing at the agency, all written comments given to us tonight, and all verbal comments given here this evening. A court reporter is present this evening to create a record of tonight's proceedings. Questions and comments made at the public hearing will be responded to in a document known as a response to comments. The director, after taking into consideration the recommendations of program staff and comments presented by the public, may issue or deny the wastewater discharge permit, Mercury Variance. Once the final decision is made, the applicant and all persons on the interested parties list for this site, including those who signed in this evening, will be notified, and a link to the response to comments will be provided. Final actions of the director are appealable to the Environmental Review Appeals Commission, also known as ERAC. The board is separate from Ohio EPA and reviews cases in accordance with Ohio's environmental laws and rules. Any ERAC decision is appealable to the Franklin County Court of Appeals. Any order of the Court of Appeals is appealable to the Supreme Court of Ohio. Each person may only testify once and will be given 3 minutes to do so. I ask that you are respectful of others, providing their comments and questions, whether you agree with them or not. There is no cross-examination of the person providing testimony or Ohio EPA staff during the public hearing. Ohio EPA's public hearings afford citizens an opportunity to provide input, so we will not answer questions during the hearing. An Ohio EPA representative may ask clarifying questions of the speaker to ensure that the record is as complete and accurate as possible. If you have a question that was not addressed during the Q&A session, please ask it on the record, and it will be addressed in writing within the response to comments that I mentioned. As I call your name, please come forward to this podium, to the blonde wood podium there. State and spell your name for the record and proceed with your testimony. Thank you. All right, the first person to provide testimony will be Linda Stewart. Linda, please come forward and state and spell your name for the record.
My name is Linda Stewart. First name is spelled Linda. Last name is spelled Stewart. Hello, my name is Linda Stewart, and I am a marathon swimmer. I trained for my first 17-mile swim race in Lake Erie. I want everyone to know that by protecting this lake, the community is not just protecting the valuable ecosystem in nature, but also protecting the livelihood of myself and others who cherish their memories of Lake Erie. This lake is not any one person's or corporation's possession to destroy, but rather a resource for all to enjoy and take pride in. I am not above begging. I understand that every solution may not be resolved overnight, But even if there is no ability to dramatically reduce the current amount of wastewater being dumped into the lake, I beg that the NRG power plant consider other ways of helping, like investing some profits in renewable and green energy sources in preparation for the future, or that the NRG assist in research and other equally pressing concerns like the harmful algae bloom crisis. I ask that the EPA and NRG power plant show mercy for the lake, our happiness, and take a sustainable stand for our future.
Next is Lisa Kenyon. State and spell it.
Lisa Kenyon, Lisakenyon. My name's Lisa Kenyon. I think, as I said before, during the question period, that the EPA and the company should be making available at a hearing like this where the landfill is, what the status of it is it mined, how much is that tested, what is the ground around that tested, what's the closest body of water to it, is that water tested? And I think it relates to the other lady's question that talked about how old the plant is and whether the land around wherever that underground part is should, runoff should go from any of that groundwater into the lake and it's not been tested. Also, to inspect their work ain't good enough, folks. You need to be testing the water to actually know, because, and also to keep adding more mercury after we were already established that some of the technology you were using was inadequate to detect it at gross levels. There's already a lot that you're not accounting for. So that's been fairly recent. That's pretty disgusting. And I'm glad there is no high EPA, but I thought that we're being failed in those ways. And also, I think it should be actually part of the, I know it's not part of your mission, but it should be part of it to start requiring, and the Ohio government should get involved in requiring companies to start investing, as the other young lady said, in clean energy. This stuff is dinosaur stuff that's killing our planet and it's screwing up our water. It's making us sick. It's neurological damage. It's cancer. It's heart disease. You name it. And I've lived in other places where the water was highly compromised, like I said, by Duke Energy in North Carolina. They don't drink their municipal water. I don't want that to happen here. And I also care about the wildlife. Maybe you can get it out of the water for the municipal water, but what we have a huge fishery, the biggest one on Lake Erie here. I don't want the animals to have to swim around in that crap either. Thank you.
Next is Carol Kelleher.
Hi, I'm Carol Kelleher, Carolkelleher. I wrote my remarks too. My name is Carol Kelleher, and I'm a resident of Westlake, Ohio. I grew up in Northeast Ohio in Lakewood in the 60s and 70s, back when we would never consider actually swimming in Lake Erie. I mean, some of you remember those days. During those days when, yes, our river did burn. But my husband and I moved back to Ohio about 1.5 years ago, and I was just thrilled at how Cleveland is thriving. People are actually swimming in the lake. You can go to Edgewater, Huntington, people are in the lake. As another woman said, I'm not a scientist, and I'm certainly not an engineer. But I have been a banker, and I've been involved in real estate for much of my professional life. So I can confirm what we all know, that a healthy and economically viable Northeast Ohio absolutely depends on a healthy and viable Lake Erie. And you don't need to be a scientist to know that you don't want your grandchildren, or in my case, our dogs, swimming in that water, in the contaminated toxic water. In closing, I would urge the Ohio EPA to seize every opportunity to improve the health of our greatest resources and fulfill your mission as the Environmental Protection Agency, and to strive and to eliminate toxic discharges in the Lake Erie. Thank you.
Ms. Kelleher, we have turn your remarks in and we can make them a part of the record.
I can't get
Very well. All right, thank you. Next is Amanda Will, I believe. Sure the pronunciations.
Hello, my name is Amanda Willies. A-M-A-N-D-A, W-I-L-L-E. I am a resident of Lorraine, Ohio. And sorry, I'm going to try not to get emotional about this. But it bothers me that we are even considering having contaminated waste being discharged back into our waters, into our most precious resource that we enjoy, Lake Erie. When I heard that filtration through the condenser was only a once-through filtration, I thought to myself, only once? Bothered me. I also heard in the statements earlier that the data that's being used is from 1998. It's now 2018. That bothered me as well. And if this passes, then it won't even take effect until 2023, which is 5 years from now, that we have to worry about what is going on currently. When the inspection was explained that it was just records that they looked at to make sure, but no water testing, that is what they were here. That should be a priority in every inspection, every time. My question I have as well, with the thermal exchange and when the heated water is going back into Lake Erie, and the statement that was made was that the fish aren't affected, basically. How do you ensure that? The fish don't really follow any kind of traffic signals. Not any fish that I've seen. And I do enjoy fishing, which I've noticed. I'm not sure if I had bad luck last year, but the reduction of perch and how I see the fish has started changing in what we're catching. So those are my statements. I hope they're considered, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. All right, it looks as though this name is Glenn Sonnenlitter. I apologize for mispronunciation.
Hi, my name is Glenn Sonnenlitter, Gerald Glenn, G-R-A-L-E, Glenn Sonnenlitter, S-O-N-E-N-L-I-T-T-E-R. I live right across the street from the plant, more or less, so I get to see a lot of things that happen, that, in my opinion, it's not a clean plant. For one instance, I put a brand new driveway in, and you can actually see the driveway sections of the sidewalk I replaced. They're getting stained. So even after the upgrades, a few years ago, they promised that, they were going to do the upgrades. Then they talked about shutting the plant down. Then they finally did the upgrades of the scrubbers, and that hasn't changed. So, you can come and take a look at the driveway if you want. I mean, it's evidence that when you're outside, you can smell the coal burning in the plant. So my question is if you can smell that in the air, and you can see the pollutants in the air, and you can see the particles that are actually setting, and, I've had the same problem with the neighbors. People that, we park cars outside, you can see the oxidation on the cars. So it's there, it's relevant in the air, so if it's relevant in the air, why wouldn't it be in the water? It's kind of weird that we're not testing the water. So that's kind of something that I feel that the EPA should be protecting us. I have a family of 2 kids, young kids, so they have a lot of years left to grow up. So that type of pollutions or whatnot, I don't know what kind of health effects they could have throughout the years. So that's kind of a concern for myself and my family. And also, take a look at some of the things that Stephen Hawking used to talk about, especially the moments before his death. One of the most important things he said was, we have to really start safeguarding, because roughly every 40 years the population doubles and even triples. So if you look at some of the things that some of the industries doing in the world, especially China, it's to the point you go to China, you can't even breathe. They actually have an air index that you look on the news for people like us. If you look at the UV index and whatnot, they actually have an air quality index, whether or not that you can go outside, if it's safe to breathe, if it's safe to wear a mask. In some cases, there's certain levels they have where you can't even go outside. So if it wasn't for the EPA and you guys making decisions to safeguard us, I mean, if you look at what the other countries are, now you're hearing that some of that pollution is actually coming our way. So we have to make these decisions to start protecting our planet. That's how we do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Next up is Allison Ricker.
Allison, A-L-I-S-O-N, Ricker, R-I-C-K-E-R. I just wanted to offer a clarification in response to some of the questions that were earlier. Sourcewash.org, October 27, 2017, notes that NRG said the Avon plant would remain open for at least 3 years in 2017, based on a contract the utility has with PJM that runs until 2020. So it seems likely that possibly by 2020 they would be converting to natural gas if the pipeline that is necessary can be permitted. To me, this means that there's just going to be 3 more years of kind of same old business as usual, instead of, we're talking about permitting that won't actually take effect until after 2020, when possibly the plant will no longer be burning coal. And I would like the new safeguards be put in place much sooner. Obviously, we don't want to increase the waste into the lake or into landfills that we don't even know where they are.
Thank you, Ms. Ricker. Next is Elizabeth Beasley.
Oh, I don't want to do that. Okay. Thanks so much. My name is Elizabeth Houston Spraker Beasley. E-L-I-Z-A-B-E-T-H-H-U-S-T-E-D. Spraker, S-P-R-A-K-E-R. Beasley, B-E-A-S-L-E-Y. Thank you for this opportunity to come to say something. I was dismayed to find that this hearing was necessary. 2 summers ago, my husband and I forewent our vacation in order to pay to have our pipes split in order that no bad things would go into the lake. It was expensive for us, and we have an old house where nothing is easy. All of you know about that. Every single person who owns a home or a rental unit or has any stake in any land here in Avon Lake had to go through that process. All of us have had to put money where our mouth was. If we wanted to improve the lake, we dipped into our pocket. We gave stuff up. And to come here and find that more things, but different things are going to be dumped into the lake is very disturbing. And I think it also disturbs me that the Environmental Protection Agency isn't behind us. We as a city and our citizens have said yes to doing some very difficult things and some very expensive things in order to protect our environment and in order to protect the powerhouse that Lake Erie is for us. So many potential wonderful things can come from that lake if it's clean. We do not have that reputation yet. Avon Lake is known around the circles of all of the lakes as one of the most progressive and forward-looking communities. People come to take a look at how it is that our water people are managing the water. We are cleaning and actually selling water now. We're making a profit on clean water. This is the kind of thing that should be continued, not not to allow things to go backwards the way they are. I think that we should be setting a much higher mark, and we should be aiming a lot higher than we are now. And the EPA should be helping us with that, not hindering us. The EPA is in a position to say, Avon Lake has proven that they are willing to put their money where their mouth is, and they are willing to do the hard things to get clean water in Lake Erie. We would like you to join us. We would like to be able to say 5 years down the road, we did it. We did it. We have clean water. We don't have that now, and it does not look to me, as I look over the that we will be moving forward in that direction. I should also point out that Avon Lake and some of the surrounding communities have some of the best educated industrial men and women in Northeast Ohio. I would imagine that if you said to the people right here, we need to figure out some way to get that shit out of the water. If you're interested, meet me in the back corner. You would have some real smart people who would do that. It's real smart people. So I would really encourage you to stay with us, not against us, and to aim higher, much higher than this, because the potential is there. Thank you.
Testimony, I'm having a difficult time with the handwriting, is James Metzorkas or Metzorkin.
Yeah. My name is James Metzorkas. James, M-A-E-Z-O-R-K-I-S. Appreciate having a chance to come speak. I live in Westlake, and I really love to go and visit the lake. But the last couple of years, when I've gone to the lake to swim, I have felt sick the following afternoon. You know, it's just, you go in the morning, it's a beautiful day, and the waves are coming up on the beach, and you go, great, let's go swim. And then, you know, you keep coming home sick. And then, you know, so what I've done has been, like, really committed myself to environmental activism, and, like, I really suggest that the EPA do the same. Because it's so important, you know. I mean, it's the only lake we have. It's one of the biggest sources of fresh water in the entire world. And you know, while I appreciate you said like you wanted to reduce the mercury levels, that's part of the plan. It's hopelessly weak, man. I mean, it needs to be a lot stronger. It needs to be a lot stronger. And I think that really, until we get it right, we should not permit the power plant to operate. Until we have like technology that's tested and proven to work to filter this stuff out, I mean, it just keeps on going every day until that stops. I mean, that's all I have to say right now.
Next up is Charles Mitch.
My name is Charles Mitch, C-H-A-R-L-E-S.
M-I-T-C-H. I live in Westlake, Ohio. My house is about 7 miles from the plant. By way of background on myself, I am a scientist, have a PhD in organic chemistry. I also want to, while I'm speaking tonight for myself, I do want to state for the record, I am a member of the Sierra Club and I support their activities, particularly the Ohio Beyond Coal campaign. It's very important, and I thank those folks for, I believe they're the ones that requested this hearing, and I thank them for doing so. And I just want to note, for about the last 20 years, I've been involved with various, participated in various environmental regulatory processes, both here in Ohio and previously in Indiana as well. So I've developed some familiarity with the regulatory process, looking at permits, and the statutory requirements and limitations that you folks at Ohio EPA are working under. So I realize that you can't do everything you might like to do because the folks at the state legislature will tell you what you're allowed to do. Just want to know by way of background that this previous NPDES permit was issued in 2011, and I believe it expired in 2015. And then for about the last 2 or 3 years now, it's been operating with temporary administrative extensions. So this doesn't seem to be going at a very fast pace. I'm concerned at the slow pace of doing something about this. That permit from 2011, what I want us to focus on is the Mercury Variance. I have some concerns about that. In particular, that variance is based on Ohio Administrative Code at 3745-33-7D10A, and then related to that, there are requirements stated for renewal of such a variance under Ohio Administrative Code 3745-337D8. In particular, regulation states that reasonable progress shall have been made in implementing the pollutant minimization program under the existing permit prior to renewing variances approved under the paragraph. I question whether the permittee has in fact made reasonable progress. It's positive that in this last 7 years they've reduced their mercury emissions by about half, but I think after 7 years they should have a better understanding of what's going on, should have a good plan for how they're going to come into compliance. So in the absence of that, I think the permittee fails that requirement for showing reasonable progress, and action should be taken to deal with that. In particular, I'm concerned that they don't seem to be very diligent or urgent about any intentions for making further progress in the next permitting period. It appears that the Ohio EPA is proposing to allow the permit no limits to the number, the permittee, no limits to the number of variances, with no plan as to how to bring the permittee into compliance. If after 7 years the permittee has neither a plan nor a schedule for bringing this facility into compliance with water quality standards for the state, then I think an appropriate course of action should be to, for Ohio EPA and the permittee to carry out an anti-degradation study for Lake Erie as described in Ohio Administrative Code 3745-1-05. So I urge you to take those steps and to have the permittee be much more diligent and urgent in actually making reasonable progress and reject what's been presented so far as failing to meet that reasonable progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Moore. Okay, moving forward, please, Curtis Hutchison. Thanks. If you'll state and spell your name.
It's Curtis Hutchison, C-Y-T-I-N-H-U-T-C-H-I-S-O-N.
Thanks.
First, I just want to thank those who spoke before me and those who will speak after. It's humbling to see that so many of us are concerned with the environmental impacts of what's going on with the Avon Lake Power Plant. I think it's a definite representation of what we care about in our city and how we want to kind of move forward in the future for sustainable energy and looking at how we progress as humans. I want to look at a quick study here. It was done by the Engineers in Science and Chemists Association. So it's back in 2015. It just says that Avon Lake, which is Lorain County, suffers from the second largest cumulative impacts of Ohio power plant pollution, despite ranking 9th in population. Lorain County faces the highest per capita health impacts and one of the highest asthma prevalence rates in the state. Both Lorain County, which is where Avon Lake is located. I graduated from Avon Lake High School. I've been a resident here for a while. It says Avon Lake suffers from dangerously poor air quality due to levels of both ozone and fine particulate matter that exceeds the federal standards. So that was one of my questions that I was going to ask before is, do we still exceed those federal standards? And then also it says Avon Lake has been out of compliance with the Clean Air Act requirements for at least the last 3 years. I was wondering if that is also still true. Again, this is a study conducted in 2015, so I'm not sure if there's any newer studies that are more recent or more accurate, but if there were, that'd be great to see those too. I'd like to see a little more, I guess you could say, information brought to the meetings about the environmental impacts. Yes, we see that there's mercury coming out of the plant and those things, but where, how was that found? Was it something the EPA did? Was it an independent study? Like, what's the information that we're looking at? Again, just kind of moving forward, I do feel that we need to get away from using coal. We need to get away from harming the earth. You have to think not only about Avon Lake, but what's going on where we're taking that coal out of the ground from. So not only are we harming ourselves by burning the coal here, but saying we're going to do it here, give someone else the the idea to take it out somewhere else. So we're not only hurting ourselves, we're hurting people other places in the world too. So I would say anything that we can do to reduce the pollution that's in the air or in the lake, that we need to do that. And if that involves blocking a permit they're looking for to say, hey, we want to go ahead and dump stuff in the lake, then we should go ahead and block that as a, as a community and as concerned citizens. Thank you.
Thanks. The next person to provide testimony would be Jane Conium.
Just state and spell your name, please.
Okay. My name is Jane Conium, and it's Jane. And last name is Coniam. And I want to say I've been impressed with the quality of testimony being given and the qualifications. It's incredible. I want to say a couple of things. And I know that this is a variance in regard to the water specifically, discharges and stuff. But you can't just say, oh, this is just water, this is just air. One of the things that I have noticed over the years living within a mile or two of that plant is that at times they take and build up pressure in their stacks to clean it out. So you'll hear what I always think, it sounds like a dragon, going, and then you hear this go, okay? That is mercury, other emissions being blown out of the stack and into the water. Now, how do you measure that? That's not true. Okay. Well, then maybe that is something that I need a clarification on. But the other part of it is that I do know that Avon Lake Power Plant is one of the biggest airborne mercury emitters in the state as well as nationally. We rank 8th out of 20 power plants in the state and 88th
out of 457 in the nation. We have death and disease attributed to the fine particle pollution from the Avon Lake Power Plant. And let's see, annual incidents of death are attributable to heart attacks, asthma attacks, chronic bronchitis, and asthma ER visits, all contributing to high healthcare costs in our county. The other part of it is that Northeast Ohio has an increased rate of breast cancer as compared to other parts of Ohio. And while it's unknown as to the exact cause, it may be also very much related to the discharge of the chemicals that are being, and carcinogens that we're releasing into the environment. But and one of the other things that I have found is that this Avon Lake plant and our county landfill are our largest county polluters. And this one, let's see, yeah, it's Ohio has the second highest death rate from overall power plant emissions, according to the Clean Air Task Force. Now I know, again, this is in regard to water, but you can't just say water and air aren't related. You have stuff coming out of the stacks that's going up into the air that the rain and other things will be bringing on down too. So we need to look out for the health of our little area of the world, because the world is also warming. I know there are people who don't think so, but that aside, wouldn't you rather be on the right side and say we protected our environment, as opposed to looking back and saying, gee, I really wish that we hadn't done that. So thank you so much for your
The next name I have is Rosa Gee.
Rosa, R-O-S-A, G-E-E is my last name. That's correct.
We have a Gee in the family, so.
I do realize that this is a draft permit. After all the time that the last permit lapsed and there hasn't been a permit, I understand the urgency of getting this permit done. That I am aware of. I am very saddened to see that there is nowhere in the permit for testing soil, nowhere in the permit for testing the water, and storm fallouts are the sections that go from storm water that go out into the lake. Avon Lake and Sheffield Lake have major ones because we're the end source for stormwater. By us not knowing where the bottom ash is being taken and dumped, not knowing why you're not testing it, we need to count on the EPA. Many of us in Northern Ohio really are worried, knowing that we're hearing from Washington, D.C., that the EPA is having cutbacks being done. We need to have you in our corner now while you're still here, before they take you away. We need the water tested, we need the soil tested, and not by the owners of the plant. Thank you.
Next up is Dan Reed. Pardon me. Mr. Reed, if you'll state and spell your name.
Okay.
Thank you.
My name is Dan Reed. That's D-A-N-R-E-E-D.
Thank you.
And I have a simple question from earlier that wasn't answered or asked. And that is, we know about the permits, we've heard about that, but what we didn't hear is what are the consequences of non-compliance related to the owners? And as part of that consequence, is the permit, or will the permit, it permits in the future, be plant-specific or corporate-specific? And by that I mean, if if Corporation A ceases to desist, what happens to the permits? And the third part of that is, has the Ohio EPA reached out to Canada, which owns half of this lake, as someone to work with in terms of compliance? That is it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, next up is Ed Neal. Thank you. Please just state and spell your name. Sure. Thank you, sir.
Edward Neal, E-D-W-A-R-D, N-E-A-L. I live in Wesley. And essentially, I have a question. In the presentation, we heard that there are a number of standards set, and there are a number of processes, industrial processes, that are based on what is quote, the best technology available. And I wonder who determines what is the best technology available. How is that process done? Is there any sort of, where do those ideas originate? And how are those ideas decided upon? And also, it's described as the best technology available. It's not good technology. It's not better technology. It's the best technology available. So how do we know that these standards, the processes that are used, like for the fish entrainment and so on, are the best that are available, known either through studies or what's known through the U.S. or worldwide. It's a global world we live in, and we should look outside the U.S. for ideas if we're looking for the best solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Neal. Gary Gray. State and spell, please.
Sure. First name Gary, last name Gray, G-R-A-Y. I did see members of our city government here today, so I certainly hope that you are listening to what you're hearing, because we're our voters here. And as you have ongoing discussions with the folks at NRG moving forward, I hope you take this into consideration, because this is all very important. Avon Lake is the last coal-burning power plant in Ohio that discharges toxic wastewater directly into Lake Erie. The plant generates very little electricity today, but an astonishing amount of air and water pollution. Like the plant itself, the draft permit is antiquated, and it allows NRG to continue to pollute almost unfettered. The draft permit asks only that NRG investigate the feasibility of reducing intake flows during times the plant is not in operation. This is not adequate. It makes no logical sense to allow this corporation to continue to kill fish in Lake Erie unfettered when it is not even generating any electricity. At the very least, the draft permit should be revised to require that Avon Lake reduce flows and therefore fish kills when it's not operating. NRG should be required to complete its studies as soon as possible and install equipment that reduce fish kills. In addition, after consulting with these affected municipal drinking water utilities, the Ohio EPA should assess whether lower discharge limits for bromides from the Avon Lake Power Plant are needed to protect drinking water quality. If necessity to protect drinking water quality, the final Avon Lake Power Permit should include discharge limits for bromides. In this draft permit, the Ohio EPA has proposed to give NRG a variance that would essentially allow it to continue its business as usual approach to dumping mercury directly into Lake Erie. The Ohio EPA has proposed to allow this continued business as usual approach based on a 20-year-old study that assessed costs and benefits of mercury reduction at coal burning plants generally, not specifically at Avon Lake. Given the gravity of the mercury pollution problem in Lake Erie, the generic approach to considering costs and cost benefits is not sufficient. So my question is essentially, one, when was the last time EPA was at the plant? And two, why are we changing the mercury air permits or mercury permits when essentially we are still not addressing the air permit issues currently at the plant, as mentioned by somebody earlier in terms of the temporary. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Next up is James Williamson. Let's just state and spell your name.
Hi there, I'm James Williamson, James, last name Willilliamson. I'll be speaking on behalf of myself and my wife, Rena, R-E-N-A, and our daughter. We're from Highland Heights, east side, and we are very much in opposition to the renewal of this wastewater discharge permit. The reason is rather simple. The first is that this presentation did not inspire a lot of confidence, and the second is because it's 2018. And as an engineer, knowing what I know about the effectiveness and accessibility of renewable energy, it's stunning that we're even having this conversation. Cities like Burlington, Vermont, and Georgetown, Texas are already running on 100% renewable energy. Other cities like San Jose have made a commitment. They have a plan. Cleveland's not even considering it, which is strange in and of itself. But there's no reason to support the discharge of wastewater into a body of fresh water. I literally don't know what else to say. Thank you.
Next up is Judith Appleton.
My name is Judith Appleton, A-P-E-L-E-T-O-N. And I'm basically representing myself, but I'm also representing Sarah from the Citizens Climate Law. I appreciate the most serious concerns that have been expressed by people regarding the use of the drinking water and the air. And I can't add any more to that, but I'm also concerned about the moving waters on lake temperature. We've already seen what's happening in the shallower western basins from global warming alone. Well, probably mostly from global warming. Warming the waters, it's been frequent toxic algal blooms. We're killing the lake in that area, making the water non-drinkable, and interfering with recreational activities. The fish are gone, they've died. And we need to protect the deeper and cooler central and eastern basins now from the addition of warm water and from general heating of the planet from global warming. If you want to continue to have fish breeding and feeding in the cooler water, deeper waters, and if you want to continue having recreational activities. That was mainly what I was thinking of when I wanted to get the talk. However, we should be I hear that this plant is really pretty inefficient, so as far as what it's doing in the line of electricity consumption. So why aren't we transitioning to renewable energy technologies as of yesterday, or maybe a decade ago, or before? This means thinking of closing this plant. And I think that in transitioning, you have to realize that Europe and China are far ahead of us, and they are leading the way, and we're dragging our collective feet. I know the EPA can't say the word global warming or something similar to that, but you do need a dose of courage, at least, in the time.
Next up is Rob Roart or Roart, I'm not sure.
Rob R-O-V, Roark, R-O-A-R-K. I work for a wire cloth manufacturer. We've made filters for the Avon Lake Power Plant. I know what I'm talking about. I don't think I know, or pretend I know. We make filters. They're good quality filters. They're made of the best stainless steel you can buy. They're not garbage, they're not junk. And when we make it right. You got a problem with that? Kiss my lily white you know what. Number one. Number two, if you guys are so worried about everything, how about the guys that work at the plant? Are you going to pay for their kids' college? Are you going to pay for their Christmas presents? Are you going to pay for their birthday presents? How come none of you guys are looking at me? Where's the eyes? Come on, where's the eyes? Put your wallet where your mouth is. Put your wallet where your mouth is. Or be quiet, please. As for environmental killing fish, the captains on the lake love the power plant. The fish have spawned there in the winter. The warm water helps. Talk to the captains on the lake. Don't read the BS that comes out of Washington and the environmental wackos.
Excuse me, please. Can't interrupt him whether you disagree.
As for the power plant, I do agree it needs improvements. But what are you going to do, shut it down?
Stop. Quiet, please.
Who's going to make up for the taxes? Are you guys?
Yeah.
Really?
Excuse me.
Renewable energy, we had a contract for
Mr. Rourke, 1 minute, please.
Years to make fuel cells. Do you know how dirty fuel cells are? Do you know how they make fuel cells? It's graphite wire cloth with carbon, sheets of carbon pressed onto each layer. Do you know how dirty that is? Then it's got to be sent out for a special annealing process, which means it's heated to 2,000 degrees for 4 hours. How much energy is that taking? Duh. But did any of you guys know that? I guarantee not one of you in here knew that. Then they got to be shipped back to us for another process. Then they got to be shipped out.
Mr. Rourke, your time is up.
New York.
Mr. Rourke, thank you.
And that all takes energy. And you call that clean energy?
Mr. Rourke, your time is up. Next up is Pat Sirio.
You should work for the White House.
Please state and spell your name, ma'am.
My name is Pat, P-A-T, Serio, S-E-R-I-O.
Thank you.
I'm a certified nurse midwife, and I've been working with mothers and babies in Lorain County for 45 years. We have recommended to pregnant women that they only consume Lake Erie fish once a month because of the mercury contamination. But the truth of the matter is that many low-income women need to eat fish from Lake Erie much more often than that. So I'm asking you to be reasonable and consider the health of the unborn babies and make your goal of mercury pollution much lower than it is now. Because the truth of the matter is women are consuming lots more fish and are eating a lot more, exposing their babies to a lot more mercury. And we know that mercury is damaging to the developing brain and to any brain. Thank you.
All right, the final blue card that I have has Diana, and I'm not sure of the last name. It's Tate. Tate, thank you. I thought maybe. If you'll just state and spell your name for the record, please.
My name is Diana, spelled D-I-A-N-A, T-A-I-T. First, I want to say I agree with Mr. Williamson 100%. And I would like to have someone from the EPA please recite to me what their mission statement is. What is the EPA's mission statement?
We can't respond to anything during the hearing. We're here just to listen to that, please.
Okay. here's what I think. I think the permit should be completely denied. I have lived here all my life. I lived on the beach in Marine Harbor, right at the Marine Lighthouse in my backyard. And I can tell you what's going on with the water quality behind my house. Also, I can speak to disease that people discussed in here. Did you know that in Lorraine County alone?
Louder, please.
Did you know that in Lorraine County, I was widowed to brain cancer? And this area, according to the neurooncologists, has had a 70% increase in MS, neurological disease, and brain disorders of all kinds. Now, I'm not saying this plant alone has done it, but I am saying that I feel the EPA is more of a facilitator to rich energy companies than they are to protecting the ground, the environment, and the people who live in these areas near these plants. These companies have made a lot of money on this dirty plant. Instead of selling themselves every 5 years to high tax money, I'm guessing, or for other growth, they could take the money that they've earned and invest in sustainable energy. There's no reason why we have a coal plant. And I feel that this permit should be completely denied, and I see the EPA as more of a facilitator than a protection agency. I'm sorry if I offended you, but I've lived here my whole life. I'm still living in the beach that I grew up on and voted for years. And I can tell you the water here is not clean. I find dead animals in my backyard, dead fish constantly. I am a fisherman. I've been a boater here all my life. I do not eat the fish from this lake, and I won't. And I don't recommend anyone in this room does. I am on a fish and vegetation diet. And I can't eat what comes out of Lake Erie. I don't trust it. If you ever have visited the Ohio State University's Research Center at the foot, you will learn about the quality of this water. And I'm not saying that it's just this plant, but I know that this agency has limitations to what they can do. And if they're here to help protect the environment, or are they here to facilitate a second permit for this dirty energy source? I don't feel that this permit should be passed permitted at all. We need to just take it on our heads, take it out of our wallets, whatever we have to do, and get going with other cleaner energies. You look at nations like Japan, all the disease that they've allowed their people to have from polluted waters and mercury levels in their fish. We don't need to be them. This country right now, for me, is a little bit embarrassing. This agency, if they have a mission statement, I think they need to have more power if it isn't enough. I feel that they're limited in what they can do for us, and I think we really need to move more toward cleaner, sustainable energy, not just here, but everywhere. So I'm not a proponent of this. When you get a 70% increase in neurological diseases in this area, especially Avon Lake, and there right now is polyvinyl chloride buried right behind this library, right down the street, across the street from this plant. And what happens is the statute of limitations expires. The companies that made all the money who buried this are polluting all of this. When that statute is gone, there's no cleanup required. So like these people have mentioned, you don't know the quality of the soil here, the drinking water. I can tell you that people who work at this board plant, they have a really large number of brain cancer in their employees, and they use cooling water from this town to cool their machinery. And this is not a joke. This plant should be shut down, in my opinion. And I would definitely, if this went to a vote, I would vote against it. And I have all the medical records to prove what I'm talking about. It's very upsetting to me to see what has happened to this waterway, and that big money and big corporations control all of our government. Every decision that our politicians make at any level of agency and government, we're all facilitators, and the nation should be working for the people and the environment, not for these big corporations. So I would totally recommend no permit extension for this plant.
All right, Ms. Tates was the last card that I have. I'm going to give one last opportunity if anyone wants to provide testimony who did not turn in a card. Please raise your hand. Yes, ma'am. Just state your name for the record, please.
I came here 7 years ago from Pittsburgh because I love the wonderful, wonderful waters of our treasure. of Lake Erie. I brought a check with me for $50 in answer to the man, well, how are we going to pay for this? Because we have such a treasure. And I just want you to know that we really do appreciate the supervision of the Environmental Protection Agency. And thank you for helping us keep it clean.
Ma'am, would you state and spell your name for the record so that it's official?
Oh, yes.
Does that should that have rubber corners on it?
That's enough from the audience, please. Very disrespectful. Ma'am, just read your name, thank you. Yes. All right. All right, remember that written comments will be accepted through the close of business May 2nd, 2018. These can be sent via email or post to the addresses found in the agenda and presentation. The time is now 7:52. Seeing no one else wishes to provide testimony, this hearing is adjourned. Thank you for coming this evening.